I'm sure they'll trickle in as we go, but we'll just get started. We'll just start with the recap, so while we're waiting for them. The big thing that happened last lecture was Rome put the decemviri in place. Remember the decemviri? They basically took 10 elected officials, and their job was to write up all Roman law. And so now if you go to the forum, there's the 12 tables of Roman law, all written out so that everyone can see what the laws in Rome are. So they did the decemviri. The decemviri became tyrannical, and then they basically had to overthrow the decemviri. In the overthrowing of the decemviri, the plebs, you know, the power pendulum swung into plebs' favor against the patricians, and the plebs, having that power, pushed forward, first off, the repeal of the law, two major laws. They got rid of the law that made so that intermarriage between patricians and plebs was illegal. So there was that law. And then the other one that they were pushing for was the election of plebeian consuls. They want plebs to be able to run for the consulship. And remember that the consulship is ultimately just a piece of the king's power. So going back to the Roman monarchy, if this is the king's power, when they put the republic in power, they split the king's power up into a bunch of different positions. And so the consulship was just a piece of the king's power. And so the plebs' ultimate argument was, anyone could have been the king of Rome. Why on earth is a consul of Rome so special, and why do you have to come through this special bloodline to qualify as a consul of Rome? And remember, the last hope the patricians had as an argument against it?
It was their one of their religious positions?
Yeah, it's the consul isn't just the king's power, they're also an honorary augur. They have this special religious part of their power that wasn't part of the king's power. And it's for that reason that we can't let you plebs hold this office. And the plebs said, fine, don't give us that power, and we'll cut it off right here. We won't be honorary augurs or whatever, and give us all the rest of the powers. We're quite happy to settle for just that. And so, to stop themselves from actually changing what a consul is, rather than that, the position that they came up with is what is now going to be called a military tribune. Probably have it written here somewhere.
At the very bottom on the right.
At the very bottom on the right. Okay, so now they made the position of a military tribune. And so now each year, either we're going to have military tribunes elected or consuls elected. Because they essentially have the same powers, you can't have both of them in office at the same time. So each year they're going to choose, do we want consuls to be elected this year, or do we want military tribunes to be elected this year? The only difference between them is, one, military tribunes don't have that special extra bit of, I'm also a priest, technically. Two, only two consuls can be elected each year. If we're electing consuls, there has to be two of them. That's the law. There is no law governing how many military tribunes can be elected. Well, there is a law. There's a cap on it of 6, but that's it. And so a military tribune is also a more dynamic position that Rome can use when they need to face multiple armies, right? If Rome has to send an army against the Aequi, the Volsci, the Sabines, and the Etruscans, they need to field 4 armies at the same time. But an army has to be fielded by either a consul or a dictator. And so we've noticed a couple times already, when both the consuls were busy, Rome had no choice but to appoint a dictator also to go out and lead the next army. So just to deal with the logistics of actually having that many armies in the field. So that's another advantage that military tribunes have, is we're not limited to just 2.
Why would the plebs only petition for position of consul and not all of the other high positions?
So there's when the Roman Republic gets in full swing, there's going to be 4 magistracy offices that you can hold. Consul, praetor, which doesn't exist yet. Aedile, which kind of isn't in the cursus honorum yet. It's not really looked at as a magistrate position. Aedile, by etymology, literally means temple builder. So there are plebeian aediles, and there are 2 patrician aediles, 2 of each. But they're not really seen as government positions yet. And then quaestors. And right now, you're right, they're not pushing for quaestors. We'll see that here next. Probably tonight, if not the next week.
They just push straight to the top, right?
But yeah, they go straight to the top because they have this great argument for straight to the top. Because it's the position that's meant to replace the king. And so now there's going to be military tribunes. A military tribune can be a patrician or a pleb. So from here on out, one of the things we're going to see tribunes of the plebs constantly pushing for is, next year we should elect military tribunes, not consuls. And that's what they're going to be pushing. And they're going to get the Senate to try and agree to that. And the reason that they want military tribunes is because then potentially a pleb could be elected to a military tribune, which is basically having a plebeian consul, which would be a huge achievement for them. So that's what the tribunes are going to be largely pushing for from here on out. For the next 40 years, we're going to see basically alternation. Really, it's going to be a few years of one, a few years of the other. But basically a back and forth of consuls being elected one year and tribune and military tribunes being elected another year. Okay? So, kind of setting up from last time where we were, I think that kind of gave you the big idea. One more thing to touch on from last time. I just went back a slide, not forward a slide. That was of significance. Was remember the dispute between Ardea and Aricia? So those two cities, Ardea and Aricia. Right now, they are Roman allies. What does it mean to be a Roman ally? It means you come under Rome's jurisdiction. That's what it means to be a Roman ally. And for a long time, there was some piece of land between the two cities that the two cities had been fighting before. They came to Rome to settle the dispute. And while the Senate said we should give it to Ardea, they thought that that was the correct thing to do. The Roman people decided, gives me that. And so the Roman people voted the land to Rome. And since the Senate can't overrule the Roman people, the Roman assembly, there's nothing the Senate can do about it, and that's the way it was ruled on. And so with that, Ardea went into a revolt. We talked about that last time, right at the end of last time. So Ardea is revolting against Rome right now. And patricians just got a big win by making this now a regular position. Military tribunes can replace consuls. Military tribunes, plebs can run for it. And we already had 3 elected. All 3 happened to be patricians that were elected, but plebs ran for the position. And that seemed enough to pacify the plebs, that at least they could run for the position even if they didn't get it. Okay. Any other questions or anything else it feels like I should recap from last time?
Is this a democracy then? Like, is the public voting for these positions?
So the voting in the system
Senate that's choosing that.
happens by comitia centriata. Where do we get that? So here's how the voting is done. The voting, when it comes to electing these positions, is done based off of what class you are in as a person. And what class you are in is determined by your property. And so the more property you have, the more votes your class gets in deciding who is going to be the next consul. So the equites alone, which are your top elites, they make up 18 of the votes. Your first class citizens, who have to have at least 100,000 asses in terms of assessing their property, they make up 80 votes. These two together already give you a majority. And so this is the way it's voted. It's very much skewed towards the wealthy. Now remember, all your patricians are also included in this class. So your patricians are a small part of the population. When someone gets elected, it's not really the patricians that are determining it, it's the patricians plus the wealthy plebs. The wealthy plebs have a way more say than the patricians alone. It's just that the patricians have a lot of sway with the wealthy plebs because their interests are largely aligned. So, your vote is disproportionate. Your vote is proportionate to your wealth, and your taxes are also proportionate to your wealth. So the wealthier you are, the more you're taxed, and the more of a vote you have. And that's the way that they elect some of the positions. Some of the positions, like the tribune of the plebs, is elected by tribe. Each tribe gets 1 vote. And so that's just basically closest thing to a democratic representation of the people you get. But for your consuls, your military tribunes, it's going to be this assembly that elects them. Okay. Any other questions before we move forward? Think we're good?
the voting of the, I think you said it, and I want to make sure, the voting of the military tribunes
and consuls,
are done the same way, which is through
Comitia Centuriata, which is also the one that determines laws being passed that are binding over everyone. The tribunes can pass laws binding only over the plebs using the plebs council, which is by tribe. So they can get more democratic laws, but those only apply to the plebs since only the plebs can vote on them. The ones that also apply to the patricians have to go through the Comitia Centuriata, which is the wealth-based one. All right. Moving forward. So, plebs just got a big win. Following this up, consuls are now going to push for a new position to be made. So we just made a new position to satisfy the plebs. Consuls are now going to push for a new position. The new position is one that we talked about already when we talked about the Roman Republic in general, but it's the censor position. Up until now, anytime a census was being carried out, it was being done by a consul. And remember, the census determines your wealth value, so it determines how you vote, it determines your tax responsibility, and you're not a Roman citizen until some census is taken that records, yep, you are now a Roman citizen. The census also occurs to put people in the Senate. You can't become a senator until one of your censors actually goes and puts you on the Senate rule books. That's the only way that you are officially entered into the Senate. And so these things were supposed to be happening once every 5 years. The problem is Rome has been at just constant war nonstop. And the consuls have just not had time to consistently keep up on the responsibilities of the census. And so what the consuls want, because the census has already been delayed something like, 4 years back to back, that was supposed to be done and just kept not getting done, the patricians decide to try and push forward this new position called the censor to help the consuls out with their responsibilities, specifically for the censorship. And with the plebs just barely getting a big win, they're okay letting the patricians have this position. Now the patricians, they want this position to help out the consuls. What they told the plebs is true. But there's another reason that the patricians want this new position. The reason that they want this new position is because it's going to be another magistrate in the state that is only a patrician magistrate. Because a qualification for becoming a censor, in order to even run for election, you have to have already been a consul. Not consul or tribune of, not consul or military tribune, you had to have been a consul. So they were tricky in how they made sure this came up. Only patricians will be able to run for this position, and so it will be another magistrate in this Rome that is a patrician magistrate. So the censorship is officially established in 443 BC. And reminds you of the rules for the censorship, the responsibilities, the rules, everything around it. So first, only open to past consuls, just like a dictator. Second, we're going to elect 2 of them every 5 years because that's how often the census needs to be done. So they're supposed to carry out the census and then deal with all the fallout of carrying out the census, like new citizens came along or whatever you got to do, all the logistics of it. Now, initially, they served for 5 years until the next censors were elected. We're going to see pretty soon here that gets restricted to 18 months. Turns out these guys were given quite a bit of power and they decided they don't like him being in office that long. They conducted the census, so registered citizens as citizens, and would assess their property value. They kept the Senate rules, so these guys decided who was and was not a senator. That power is just on them. Understand there aren't laws like governing how these guys have to carry out their position. They're just given their position and what their responsibility is. And so it's your job to maintain the Senate rules. There isn't someone who gets to say, that's not how you maintain the Senate rule. I guess a tribune could veto them trying to add someone or something like that, but it'd be a weird place for a tribune to get involved. So it's a lot of power that they're given here. And so they could also remove senators from the Senate. Since they kind of already had this power to judge who qualified to be a citizen or not a citizen and a senator or not a senator, they were also given this ability to punish immoral conduct through fines. So you can kind of warn someone that their actions are borderline getting them kicked out of the Senate. So I'm going to fine you for now, but if you don't change your behavior, you'll eventually see yourself out of the Senate. Stuff like that. So even senators could be fined by that. Extremely, a lot of power given to them. And then finally, initially responsible for record keeping regarding public contracts. So if you're going to, you know Rome's going to come under siege and you're a little guy who procures food, you might make a contract with Rome to get them a bunch of food for this upcoming siege that Rome will buy from you. And so the person you would actually negotiate that with now is the censor. And so it's going to give them a lot of power to decide who gets to provide Rome with this food and who doesn't. Who gets this big contract with the state and who doesn't. So it was seen as something small early on, but Levy talks about how it grew with time. This in particularly, they got a lot of power over the finances. Okay, so that reminds you of the censorship, what that position is. It's now going to be a thing. Any questions on the censorship? Okay, so now we got these guys elected. So, now back to our story with Ardea. So Ardea, angry, they're in revolt, feel like Rome stole some lands from them. Ardea doesn't like being in revolt against Rome. It's not a comfortable position to be in. Rome's not a very nice enemy. They're a good friend. And so Ardea sends some ambassadors to Rome saying, will you please just do something to resolve this issue so that we can be back on good terms? Now the Senate tells them, look, we can't overrule the assembly of the people. It's not in our powers. So there's nothing we can do there specifically. But we do promise to you that we will somehow find a way to make things right. If you'll just put an end to the revolt, we promise down the road, we will come with a way to make things right again. And so Ardea takes that at face value. They say, okay, we'll trust your word. And so they sign another treaty again with Rome. They're back a Roman ally like they were before. All that happened. Good? Now a fun little story in Ardea. Fast forwarding a little bit. A little bit of like a Romeo and Juliet type story. So in Ardea, there's a pretty little commoner girl. And she attracts the attention of some great noble boy and a fellow commoner boy. Now this girl, she doesn't have her father's dead. She has what they call a guardian over her. Her guardian, who's also her same class and the same class of the poor commoner boy, wants her to marry the poor commoner boy. Her mother wants her to aim higher. She says, if you got the attention of a noble, you marry up as high as you can. And so the guardian and the mom are pulling this poor girl both directions. And so it ends up going to court in Ardea. Now, who's most likely going to have power in the court? The nobles are going to have power in the court. And so, are they going to pacify the nobles or the commoners? They go with the nobles. And so the court rules in favor of the mother that the girl ought to marry the noble guy, not the poor kid. Well, the poor kid has a lot more friends than the noble guy, being a commoner. And so he gets some of his commoner friends, and they go and they kidnap the girl and they run off with her. Well, the noble doesn't like that. He has the power of the state behind him. So he gets some state helpers, basically some actual guards of the city, to go help him fight and get this girl back. And it comes to actual fighting, and people start getting killed. And this keeps escalating and escalating and escalating to full-blown war. How insane does this get? Since the commoners don't have the actual army of the state, they get the Volsci, a completely foreign nation, to send in an army to come up here and help them with the conflict. And so we now have the Volsci have Ardea completely surrounded. They are sieging the city. All starting with this girl.
The girl won this situation.
It's not recorded. We know what the mother wants of the gardener, and the guardian. Gardener.
That's what I was going to ask too.
Oh, yeah. No clue what the girl wants. Anyways, so that's what's going on in Ardea. Rome gets word that this is going on in Ardea. Understand, Ardea is now a Roman ally once again. Rome is responsible for Ardea's defense against any foreign armies. Right? When Ardea and Aricia were fighting each other, that's, siblings fighting. If the neighbor kid picks on your brother, it's a whole other story. So Rome didn't interfere with these shortcomings, but now that the Volsci are coming in and attacking, that's a foreign attack. Rome is now responsible to deal with this foreign threat. And so now Rome has to send out their army to Ardea. So you got the city of Ardea. There we are. We got the Volsci now. They build their, what are they called? Barricade around it. What the Romans do is they get their army and they march through the day and they show up in the field. And when they get there, they actually build their camp. They take the time to actually build their camp right before nightfall. Now, since they went through all the effort of putting up their camp, they're going to sleep in their camp, right? Obviously. And as soon as it gets dark enough, the consul takes his army out and has them, throughout the night, construct a barricade around the Volscian army. So now they are encircling the Volscian army, which is encircling Ardea. And so the Volsci wake up to see themselves now surrounded. And understand what these fortifications look like. Just to remind you of what they look like. What do they actually do? They dig a bunch of dirt away, pile it up, and then they pile a bunch of stakes in the ground like that, aiming up. So the idea is if your enemy is coming to you, he has to go down and now fight uphill. These are just a bunch of stakes in the ground leaning that way, and you, standing up here on the high ground, just have your spear stabbing at them as they come at you. It's a very defensive position, so very easy to hold them in. So, the Volsci surrounding Ardea, now the Romans surrounding the Volsci. And what the Romans do is they start some minor fighting, but they just fight enough to actually make a path all the way to the city of Ardea. So the Romans, I guess the Romans are technically out here, and the Volsci are technically out here behind their wall.
Yeah.
So the Romans are out here behind their wall. They make a path all the way to Ardea, so Ardea can now be supplied with food, fighting, building the fortifications in there. And with the Volsci, they kind of keep having these skirmishes on and off. Now, when the Volsci see that there's no chance of them starving out Ardea because Rome's supplying food, and they're completely surrounded, and so not a good chance of fighting out, they kind of go to the Romans and say, oh, were you going to resolve this conflict? We didn't know. So if you're here to resolve the conflict, we'll just be on our way. And the Romans say, the vanquished don't get to ask for terms. They can only ask how to surrender. And so Rome tells them, turn over your generals and we'll let you go. Now Rome's negotiating with the generals. How do the generals feel about turning themselves in? Not too hot about it. So they keep fighting for a while. When the rest of the Volscian army, the Volsci, find out this is completely hopeless, they kind of force the general to give himself up. The general gives himself up. And so, the Volsci now surrender to the Romans. And what do the Romans typically do to you when you surrender?
You can go in
Yeah,
and
the
pick
yoke. So take 3 spears, and you have to pass under it short enough that you have to bend over and go through it. And before that, they strip you of everything but one piece of clothing. So they're going to take all your armor, your swords, you're going to be left defenseless. Now, it's been a while. It was last week. Last week we kind of talked about how the Volsci kept attacking Tusculum. When they kept making intrusions, it was in the Tusculum territory. Tusculum still has some hard feelings about that. And they know Rome's tendency when an army surrenders. And so Tusculum, they brought out their own little army, and they've been waiting to see what happened. And when the Volsci are allowed to leave under yoke with nothing, Tusculum says, revenge time, baby. And so they go and they just swipe out all the Volsci who were just released under yoke. And hardly anyone was able to send any report back from the Volsci about what had happened to them.
I was going to say, it's the second time that's happened.
Well, the first time they did it, it was to the Aequi, and they got their revenge on them.
Yeah.
Now, the Volsci, who were the other one that kept picking on them, now they got their revenge on the Volsci. So, the guys there at Tusculum feeling pretty good about themselves. And Rome is probably secretly happy to have them there. That way Rome doesn't have to do the shameful deed. And they can come off looking like the nice guys. So when the Volsci are finally taken care of, okay, now it's Rome surrounding the city. And so now Rome enters their allied city with their army. And they take the instigators, behead them all, kill them for all the problems that they caused. Took the wealth of all of them involved and put it into Ardea's state treasury. And says, that's that, we're done.
Is that like the commoner instigators or the nobles?
Both.
Oh,
Just
wow.
to resolve the whole issue by killing
Both
everyone.
families,
There's no girl, there's no girl.
all 3 families, I mean.
Oh, geez.
I don't know if they would kill the girls. I'm sure that they would just hold the men responsible and kill the men. That would be my guess in how it was actually carried out. But all he says is took care of the instigators, or beheaded the instigators, something to that effect. So I'm sure the pretty girl was fine. Not often you can say, two states fought over you. It's one thing to have two guys fight over you.
Went to war.
Yeah, that's a Helen of Troy situation. Probably the closest thing Rome has. So I don't know. We'll see.
It's really more of a spark that ignites the flames when people already wanted to fight.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of that. A lot of the commoners who joined the side of the commoner simply did it because one of the things they would do is raid through the city, just plundering resources from the city itself. And so they just saw it as an excuse to basically riot for a bunch of them and get what they could out of the situation. So a bunch of people just looking to capitalize on the situation. Some of them chose the wrong side, but Rome ends up finishing it. Once Rome finishes the situation, Ardea, think about if you're an official in Ardea, what had just happened there. Your city was just surrounded. You were in a very tight spot. Rome just saved you from that. So from Ardea's position, Rome has settled their debt to Ardea. And so they have fulfilled their promise to somehow make it right, the fact that that land was taken from them. The Senate disagrees. They say, no, we didn't.
Senate
And-
of Rome?
Yes.
Why?
Yes, they say, no, we still need to make this right.
Because they were all in an obligation to defend it in the first place.
Yeah, this was just them carrying out their responsibility by virtue of Ardea being their ally. That's what it means. So remember that the lands, wherever the lands were somewhere between Ardea and Aricia. Now Ardea had just had all this internal conflict going on, and so one of the things Ardea just suffered is a good amount of death. And so what the Senate proposes to the people is they say, hey, Ardea has just lost a bunch of people. You guys just barely voted this land to Rome. What we're going to do is we're going to send a colony of Romans to this land, to Ardea, as a colony of Ardea, to supplement their population. And then the land that they'll use to actually provide for themselves will be whatever the land that we got in the conflict. So we're giving the land to the Romans, like we said, and we're also bolstering Ardea's population where they just lost a bunch of people. And so that's the way they sell it to the public. And the public says, great, that's awesome. They pass the law. Once the law is passed, you got to pick people who actually carry out the law and select who's going to go be colonists for the city. And so what the Romans do, what the Senate did, is they got a large Rutuli population. Rutuli are the people that were initially there. They got a bunch of Rutuli and sent them to Ardea as colonists from Rome to have that population. And so basically gave, in effect, the land back to Ardea. That's essentially what they did through some trickery. When the tribune of the plebs, when the plebs and the tribune of the plebs find out that that's what happened, that they had just been tricked this way, they are absolutely furious. And so the tribunes are already bringing court cases against the consuls, whose job it was to decide who gets sent on this colony trip. Now the consuls knew that when they did this, best case, they were going to be exiled from the city. Worst case, it was going to cost them their lives. So they went ahead and they signed themselves up as colonists on this little thing, and they exiled themselves when they went. So now they're going to go in Ardea. I think each person was assigned like 2 acres or something like that, and have their nice little farms and live out the rest of their lives in Ardea, no longer consuls. Why are they safe in Ardea? Why can't the tribune get them there?
Tribunes only have power at Rome.
The tribune power ends at the Pomerium. Remember, they have no power outside of Rome. There's only military power outside the actual walls of Rome. And the tribunes don't have any military power. So if they're safe out there, and the only way tribunes could ever get back at them is if they decide to go back to Rome. So that's why they're safe. Alright, so there's our fun little story with Ardea. Any questions there?
It's crazy.
Yeah. Now, going forward, the tribunes and the plebs, but the tribunes of the plebs, they are furious that they were just tricked in this way. And so they're going to go back to blocking the levy and trying to get the agrarian law passed. Remember what the agrarian law is? It's the one that takes public lands and gives them privately to all the people so that the plebs can now have access to all the private lands. Or so the plebs can have access to all the public lands. Give it to them privately so that there's ownership over the lands.
How much land is that? Just everything?
A significant portion around Rome. The way that this initially happens, you got to go back almost 300 years. What initially happens is you got Rome here, you've got some other Latin city here, and you've got this chunk of land here. Well, initially it might be Rome that has that chunk of land. What does it mean that Rome has that chunk of land? That means that their people get access to the land. And so if you're a Roman, you might go and you might start building yourself a little farm right there. But then you lose power. Rome fights a battle with this other city, local little Latin city-state, and they lose control of that land for a while. And so now someone else takes that farm. And then you guys win the next battle, and so now you guys have control over the farm again. Well, the way it worked is the guy who built the farm, he still kind of, it's just understood it's his farm. It's just precedent. There was no law involved. This is going back to when it's just little tribes fighting other little tribes. And so what ended up happening is all the land around Rome itself was what they called occupied by people. People had built their farms on it and all the infrastructure on it. And it's largely your patricians and your richer plebs who had been doing this. So this has been going on for hundreds of years. And so that's why all the land around Rome is what they called occupied land. It's not owned by the people. There was no law that gave them ownership of the land. It's just the precedent. It's how it's been forever. And so what the plebs want is to take a bunch of that land and sell it privately to the citizens of Rome so that they can get some of that land. The reason that the patricians and some of the richer plebs are against that is because they're already occupying the land, and that would be them giving up whatever their estates are that they've been building on there for generations. So that's the back and forth there. And that's why when they conquer new lands, Rome is happy to say, we'll let you guys go occupy those lands, and we'll give those lands to you privately. But why they're so resistant when it comes to lands right there around Rome?
It's theirs.
Kind of. They're occupying it.
And no one else can occupy, so therefore it's theirs.
Well, they're already working it. There's already infrastructure there. What do? Show up one day and say, hey, I'm going to have this farm too? So that's the problem, and that's why they're so opposed to the agrarian law and will do anything they can to get the agrarian law not passed. And the reason the plebs want the agrarian law passed is because all the land around Rome is occupied, and they want land around Rome. They don't want to have to go to some other location, some other city to get some land. Okay. So, levies blocked because they're angry, so they can't levy the troops against whatever military, army, Volsci, Aequi, whoever is threatening Rome. On top of that, Rome ends up having just terrible famine. So, following year, Rome has a terrible famine. This famine is a consequence of two things. One, it was a particularly poor weather condition. Two, the previous couple years had been so, there had been so much political unrest in Rome. When there's a lot of political unrest in Rome, the plebs are spending a bunch of their time in the forum. That's where all the political things are talked about. And so what was happening when there's a lot of political unrest, plebs are spending much, much more time in the forum and much less time out actually working the fields. And so the fields are neglected when there's a lot of political turmoil. And so what happens is one year, there is just a terrible, there's bad famine. It's going to be a terrible harvest this year. It's obvious. So there's not going to be much food. And the problem they have is, and it's been the case for the past couple years, even when we had good weather, that we weren't getting as much food as we used to. And food production had been going down, and now a big drop. So now they're in a really tough position. At first, they assume that it must be because people are hoarding food that there's such a small supply of food. So the plebs push to have someone appointed as master of the markets, or something like that, given some title. And his job is to basically go around and find out who's hoarding up the food and punish him. Because that is often the reason that there's a shortage, is people quickly hoard it up when they realize the city's going to be besieged or whatever. And so they assume that this must be it. They got word that there's going to be this bad harvest, and so this is really the thing causing the shortage. And the more they look into the situation, finding out who's hoarding the food, the more freaked out they become, finding out no one really has any food hoarded up, the granaries or the reserves of grain that we have are much lower than we thought. We are in a much worse position than at first suspected. And so the guys who were sent to go solve what was thought to at first be kind of a small problem realized, no, this is actually a massive problem and we're in a lot of trouble. And so they have to try and purchase as much food as they can. They purchase what they can locally, but a lot of Rome's neighbors don't like them too much. So they're having a hard time purchasing food locally, and Etruscans to the north, who are usually good suppliers for them, are kind of using the situation to charge them outrageous prices. So they can't afford the expensive stuff, and they can't get the cheap stuff because the people just won't sell it to them because they hate Rome. And so food's not coming into the city, and it's so bad, plebs are starving so bad, a bunch of them end up just drowning themselves in the river to avoid continuing starving to death. They'd rather just die and have it over with. So, terrible famine in Rome. Plebs, very desperate. Now, a plebeian, Spurius Maelius, he is an extremely wealthy pleb. The top 0.1% or whatever. Super wealthy guy. Rome's in a very desperate situation. They want food. He decides, using his own connections, he's going to be some sort of savvy business guy. He ends up getting good contracts, purchasing food from northern Etruria. And when he gets all that food, he starts distributing it to the plebs at a really low price, if not for free. One of the two. And so, how are plebs feeling about this guy? They love him. Savior of Rome, right there. So he is becoming very popular. Now there's a year where he's becoming popular, and he gets a ton of popularity. Following up year, he starts having a bunch of private meetings with the tribunes of the plebs and with other high-ranking plebs. So, starts having all these private meetings on a regular basis over and over again. Rumors start spreading that he is purchasing arms, and he's getting ready to bring them in the city of Rome. Remember, you can't bring a sword into past the Pomerium. Capital offense. So, purchasing arms. It said that he's been bribing a bunch of these plebs who are more influential, and that's what a lot of these meetings were about, and tribunes. And that he was ultimately going to try and set himself up to be a king. So once he finally got the arms snuck into the city, he was going to finally execute his plan, carry it out. The Senate, largely, it doesn't know about a bunch of this at first until a witness comes forward and they report it to the Senate. And the witness tells the Senate, I've waited this long to tell you because it was largely only hearsay, and I didn't want to bring it to you until I knew that a bunch of these things were actual facts. And the one that he reports as actual facts is that he is purchasing arms and they are coming into the city, and so you guys need to act quick. Now the Senate gets after the consuls, like, why aren't you doing anything about this? Why haven't you done anything about this? The consuls respond, what do you expect us to do about it? There's nothing we can do about it. Because the tribunes, he has the tribunes, and so the tribunes can veto any action we try to carry against him. And if we bring any sort of trial against him, the people who all love him have the right of appeal. And so there's nothing we can do against him. You guys have bound our hands. You've given up the powers that would enable us to do anything.
Even the law that they can kill someone trying to become king can be blocked by the tribune.
Well, you would have to somehow prove he's trying to become a king. I mean, you could risk it and just go kill the guy and hope that when the tribune brings the trial against you, that they decide, yep, he was setting himself up to become a king. But you would have to somehow be able to justify that. So they've got themselves kind of in a hard place here, not sure exactly what to do. Well, what do you do when you don't have any other options? You appoint a dictator. And so, once again, the Senate appoints Cincinnatus, the same Cincinnatus we know and love, dictator. Now, he's 80 years old at this time, so coming to the end of his life. He at first says, please pick someone else. I don't think I have the energy to carry this out. If I were to do something, foolish, as a consequence of my old age, it would just bring humiliation on the state. Please pick someone else. The Senate tells him, sorry, you're the only one right for the job. You got to do it. And so he says, fine, I'll do it. So Cincinnatus becomes dictator. Now, when you're a dictator, have we talked about master of the horse at all?
No.
Sorry. So when you are appointed dictator, the first thing you do is you appoint a master of the horse, and he's your right-hand man. And he basically shares in all the dictatorial powers that you have. He just has to answer to you and carry out your will, so you don't actually have to be everywhere. Now, the reason it's called master of the horse is because in the field, the dictator leads the infantry, And the master of the horse leads the cavalry. And that's where the name comes from, so for when you actually take the field. But so when a dictator is appointed, they have a master of the horse. And remember, when you hold fasces, those actual 12 rods showing that you have power, when you're a dictator, you add an axe to it to remind the people you now have power over life and death. So the Senate appoints a dictator, and now a master of a horse is leaving with fasces, which has an axe in it. People in Rome are now suddenly seeing, wait, there's a dictator? When did this happen? What's the foreign threat that led to us having a dictator? So it's a very shocking thing that suddenly there's a dictator. And suddenly someone's walking around with fasces that has an axe in it. Anyways, so Cincinnatus, when he becomes dictator, he appoints his master of the horse. And he says, okay, we'll put Spurius on trial. He'll stand trial. And we'll see what's going on here. And the reason that they appoint a dictator to hold the trial is because there's no appeal against a dictator. And you can't veto a dictator's action. So the tribunes can't block it, regardless of how popular he is. And the assembly can't just let him off the hook if he's obviously guilty. And we'll have him stand trial. And so he sends his master of the horse to basically go arrest him so that he can stand trial. When the master of the horse goes to arrest him, goes to arrest Spurius, the rich plebeian, he basically resists arrest, and he incites the people around him to help him defend himself. He says, help, they're going to try and kill me. They are accusing me of these things, blah, blah, blah. So he tries to incite the local people around him to help him physically resist a master of the horse. Now, we remember positions being sacrosanct. So, sacrosanct position in Rome, the two big ones are your tribunes of the plebs, can't touch them, death penalty offense, you lose all your property. And vestal virgins. Those are the two big normal ones. Dictators are sacrosanct the same way those two are. And so is their master of the horse. You physically trying to resist the master of the horse is a big, big, big no-no. So the second he does that, the master of the horse kills him. No hesitation. It's a death penalty offense. So he's instantly killed then and there before he's even put on trial. Now, how are the people going to feel about that?
Oh, why not?
Not so happy. So Cincinnatus, he hears what he did. He says, well, you did the right thing. He resisted you. That's exactly what you should have done. We can't, Cincinnatus, he's a by-the-book kind of guy. The law's the law. He broke the law, takes the punishment. And so he instantly goes to the assembly, gathers the assembly, because he knows people are going to be outraged as the story spreads. He's going to be the one to spread the story. So he gets up in front of the people. He says, look, here's exactly what was happening. Senate suspected that this guy was going to try and set himself up as a king, and it's because of these things that are actually happening. It shows him the evidence that he has. And he says, I know you're going to be really mad that we killed someone that you were so popular with, but look at what happened to the last guy that was really popular amongst you, that we didn't check their powers by force. Remember what that guy's name was? Appius Claudius, the famous of the decemviri. Right? In his second term, it was because the public loved him so much that he was given that power. And once he got that power, how did he treat him? So Appius Claudius throws that in their face really quick. Like, even if I let you have what you think you want, look at what I got you last time. But even then, he was not killed because he was trying to set himself up as king. We were just going to put him on trial and present the evidence. He was killed because he defied my master of the horse, which is a death penalty offense. And so that's what he was killed for. And so, since my master of the horse was sacrosanct, he was killed. And the other part of you don't only lose your life, you lose all your property. So this very rich guy now loses all his property to the state. And so Cincinnatus says, and so we're also going to take all his property and give it to the state. A bunch of his property happens to be just a ton of food that he purchased for the sake of the plebs. And so this will probably come back to you in a good way. Now Cincinnatus could have just given the food directly to him, but he doesn't want to try and make himself popular that way. He's going to trust the quaestors to do their job. But that's the way it ends up carrying out. So the state takes possession of all his assets. With all the food, they instantly just distribute it to the plebs. And so the plebs, feeling a little bit embarrassed by what Cincinnatus called them out on, and getting the bread, they're okay with it. All said and done, the plebs are kind of okay with it. The masses. The people who are not okay with it are the tribune of the plebs.
They were going to be set up.
Now, the tribune of the plebs, from their perspective, what they were going to help him do was not set himself up as a king. They were trying to make him popular to set himself up as a first military tribune the next time one of those got elected. So in the tribune's mind, they had the perfect guy to now do this. And he was just killed. So they're furious for that reason, and that's the way that they were looking at it. In their minds, they weren't helping him set himself up as a king. They were helping him get all his popularity so that he could beat a patrician in a election.
Military tribune.
And as far as the actual, was he purchasing arms and trying to bring him into the city? Don't know. That's not confirmed one way or another. Since he was killed, they didn't continue with
We try.
the trial and whatever.
Investigation. Why would he resist like he did? Was it just
He
an
thought he was gonna
emotional
die.
response?
Oh, because he actually was.
Or
Guilty.
he was probably just an arrogant guy. I mean, up until now, if there was corruption, assume that there was, and you're super rich, you could probably buy off most of the people that are supposed to be coming after you anyways, and so who knows? There could have been magistrates. Maybe he paid the local consuls to do nothing, and maybe they couldn't actually do nothing. Who knows?
Yeah.
We just have what's reported.
Right. And I have another question. Oh, I imagine Cincinnatus all these years has a lot of respect from both the plebs and the patricians.
From the patricians, he has a respect of the plebs. That's true. The plebs respect him. They don't like him,
But they respect.
but they respect him. They begrudgingly admit you're probably right. That's how it is towards him. The patricians love him. And with that, carrying out the trial, I'm not sure, getting the evidence, then getting ready to carry out the trial, then actually making sure the effects are distributed. Take him 21 days, and once again, after 21 days, Cincinnatus does that somewhat rare thing in Rome. He resigns before his dictatorship is over. Remember, when you're appointed as dictator, you get 6 months. And then it's expected you resign. There isn't someone who forces you to resign. You're a dictator. And so the majority of people who become dictator, they enjoy those 6 months. It's nice. It's a good chance to get your political agenda through, get what you want done in the state. Cincinnatus, back-to-back times, he's one of these guys that just holds it long enough to carry out the job and then gives up the power the second his job taken care of. Because when you are appointed dictator, it is for a specific task. They say, we need you to do this. And there will be other people who resign it once they're finished with the task, but it's one of the things that Cincinnatus is famous for and what later Romans look to him for. So they look at him as an example of how the dictatorship ought to be handled. Okay, and that's going to be the last time we hear about Cincinnatus. Probably died close to this,
Yeah.
80 years old.
That seems extremely old for that era.
I'm not sure an analysis of like average life expectancy versus average life expectancy for someone who reaches adulthood. Because infant mortality is going to pull average rates down a ton.
Yeah.
Like when we went through our history of philosophy class, it was shocking how old many of the philosophers got. Socrates got into his 70s before he was executed. Democritus, I think, almost reached 100. And they also just lived fairly healthy lifestyles. So I'm not sure how much to make of that. I'm not sure is that crazy long to live your life once you get past that early hump or not. Okay, did I miss anything else? Okay, so switching gears now. There was Cincinnatus, internal turmoil. Now let's talk about externally. So recently, the Aequi have kind of been dealt with, the Volsci have kind of been dealt with. Now we're going to talk about the Etruscans, and they're going to be causing us some grief going forward. In particular, the city of Veii. Because while Rome has been growing and gaining more and more influence, Veii has kind of been doing the same thing to the north. Remember, Veii is like one of their first enemies. Old hatreds going all the way back. And now this city of Fidenae, right here, remember, that was initially a colony of Veii. And Rome conquered it clear back under, I can't remember which of the kings. Probably like Ancus Marcius or somewhere around there. The middle of the kingship.
It would have been several generations since they conquered it, like at least 100 years.
Yes, it's been over 100 years, but it was still largely an Etruscan population. And I think the estimation, like I found a map that was like guesstimating what languages people spoke close to the year 500 BC. And the guesstimation is that Fidenae was still largely Etruscan, not Latin. as their primary language that people were speaking. When you look at artifacts that you can date to that time located in the city, the majority of them are Etruscan, not Latin.
So even after all those years, they still were somewhat loyal to Veii?
Yeah, there's still a lot of Veii loyalties, bloodlines, families connected that know each other from both places, continuing generations. I'm sure lots of going back and forth between the towns, very close to each other. Now, Fidenae is a crucial town. One of the reasons Rome wanted it early on is because it could help you control trade along the Tiber River going up north. And on top of that, it's where the Anio pours out into the Tiber. And so it's just a stupid good city for controlling trade in this area. Since then, what has evolved is a road called the Via Salaria. Now, it's not like a paved road, but it's just a path that traders take. And so the major path that traders take going through central Italy at this time is this path, which goes right past Fidenae. And so now, not only does it have amazing control over both the rivers, but it has good control over the land trade. So trade is the reason that everyone wants Fidenae. Rome's had it for a while. Veii wants it back. So they're going to try and get it back. So Veii has some king, Lars Tolumnius. So Lars Tolumnius, king of Veii, he, having his connections with Fidenae, he says, let's organize a revolt, and I'll help support you in a revolt against Rome, and we'll get you back to good old Etruscan the way you know you should be. And people of Fidenae, they are on board with this. So they revolt with Veii promising to support them in the revolt. Now, so far, it's kind of a piece of paper promise, not really Veii's done anything about it. Now, they declare that they're revolting. Rome hears that they're revolting. What do you do when your city's when you hear a city's revolting? First thing you're trying to figure out is what's going on here. Why are you revolting? So they send 4 ambassadors up into Fidenae to figure out why they're revolting. Fidenae sends a message to the king. What should we do with the ambassadors? The king says, kill them. Now, why does the king want to kill the ambassadors?
Anger Rome.
It anger Rome, but Fidenae trying to go to Veii would do that anyways. It shows Veii that Fidenae is serious about this. Because if they kill the ambassadors, there's no going back.
Yeah.
And they really do want to revolt. So it's one thing to say it, but when it hits the fan, are you still going to revolt or are you going to try and run back to Rome? And we're going to be the ones who are stuck in the middle of things.
Oh, so they're
testing them.
Yeah, you're seeing, are you serious about revolting, essentially?
Yeah.
And so Fidenae does just that. They kill the 4 ambassadors. Which for the Romans, that is a big no-no. So then there is this unspoken international law that you do not kill diplomats. We remember a few times in the past that Roman people wanted to kill diplomats that came to Rome, and the Senate says, no, you do not do that. And so they are furious that this happened. As a quick side note, I'll mention this once and we won't mention it again. One of the cool things Rome did is when they would send diplomats to city-states that were known enemies, if you were killed, then they made a statue of you. And it's because they recognized we don't view a diplomat as a dangerous position today, but at this time, it is an extremely dangerous thing to do. To go to a city that has declared itself hostile against you, by yourself, no army, and go into the city and try and resolve it. And so it was viewed as a very dangerous job. It was a very, it's considered a brave thing to be one of these ambassadors to go to the city. And so if you died in your line of duty, essentially, then one of the things Rome would do is make a statue of you to honor the people that died that way. So, might seem strange now, but hopefully some of that thinking makes sense. So anyways, these 4 poor ambassadors, they get killed, and so Rome is furious. And so they declare war against Fidenae. Now, it's Veii, Fidenae, and then some other town, if it were on the map, it'd be somewhere up here. I've got it written up here. Volsci. So Volsci is the other town that gets involved. Veii convinces them to get involved. This is not one of the 12 Etruscan cities. So it's a minor city. It would be more like a Tusculum is for Rome. But it's a significant city. But not one of the 12 major cities. And so Veii convinces them to help with the war effort. So Veii, Volsci, and Fidenae are now going to go to war against Rome. So what does Rome do? First thing they do, they got to hurry up, levy the troops, and go deal with the conflict. They have a fight on this side of the Anio. So the 3 armies gather up their army, they come to this side of the Anio, plundering Roman lands. consuls go out, march their army, fight them, end up winning a victory and pushing them on the other side of the Anio, but it's a Pyrrhic victory. You know what a Pyrrhic victory is? We haven't gotten to Pyrrhus yet. You'll know the exact history of a Pyrrhic victory. But a Pyrrhic victory is where technically you won, but you suffered massive losses. And at the end of the day, the losses you suffered kind of don't justify the victory you won. And so big losses for Rome initially in dealing with this, these three armies all fighting against them, but at least pushed them back on the other side of the Anio. So they're at least outside of Rome proper territory. So that's what happened in the first year's military campaigning season. Now remember, when you're a soldier who signs up in the military, you kind of just go on campaign for whatever the military campaigning season is, like 3 or 4 months, basically through the summer. You plant your crops in the spring, military campaigning season is the summer, and you got to be home in fall to harvest your crops again. And so it's only that time that you have to fight. And so during those months, they go, they clash. Rome technically wins a victory, but the other three armies are probably better off. So now we come to the next year. Rome suffered a lot of casualties, even though they technically won. They're worried about having to face off against these three armies again. And so they decide we're going to appoint a dictator and have him lead the army. So appoint a dictator to deal with this military threat amongst these three people. So Spurius Maelius, he's the one who is appointed dictator. And he gathers up the army, and how does it go? So he gathers up his army, crosses the Anio, and he sets himself up outside of Fidenae. So try and draw it somewhat here on a map to make it all make sense. So we got Fidenae there, we got the Tiber River over here. We've got the camp of the Etruscans, the Etruscans basically, of Veii and Fidenae. So their camp, wherever they're camped right there, Rome's camping somewhere down here. The way they're set up is there is some mountains right here. So they're sandwiched between some mountains and the Tiber River. That way you can protect your flanks when you send out your troops. Okay, trying to remember which one this is. Okay, so the plan for these guys. So since these guys have more men, what they decide to do, they have their armies line up, whatever their armies are. And Rome lines up their armies to face off against each other. And day after day, they kind of line up their armies, seeing if they have some sort of technical advantage, and then typically you just go back to your camp. So if you were actually one of these soldiers, most days are pretty boring. Most days you go, you stand up, you line up, seeing if today's the day you're going to fight, and then you go back to camp. And same thing happens next day. And so it drags out kind of that way. Generals redeploying their troops in different kinds of ways, trying to somehow get an advantage that till they see something they like to go and attack. And so one day, when the Romans set themselves up in a particularly defensive position, the soldiers from Volsci, the city way up here, they're getting restless. Because as time goes by, the campaigning season is getting closer and closer to an end. And they're the ones that have to go the furthest to get back to their lands, their fields, their everything. And it's a conflict that's furthest away from them. And so they tell the king, who's the one kind of leading them, the king of Veii, Ptolemaeus, that you've got to attack or we're going to go. And so they kind of force his hand to attack when he has a worse position. Now, since they technically have more troops, they keep some in reserve. And what their game plan is what we'll do is we'll engage the army, so these guys come to conflict and they start fighting each other. And we're going to send our troops here around to attack their camp. When we take their camp, you're going to build big fires, make a lot of smoke, make it clear to them that there's enemies behind you. And hopefully that will ruin their morale and we'll be able to win the battle. That's the game plan. That make sense? Remember, morale is huge in these ancient battles. It doesn't matter who's winning. All it matters is who thinks they're winning. And if you think you're going to lose, you're going to lose because your guys are going to flee the field. And so that's the plan. So that's exactly what gets carried out here. These guys come up and they go to attack the camp. Rome did lead some people in the camp, some small group of men in the camp, and so they're holding the front gate as long as they can, trying to stop the other army from breaking into their camp. So they're holding out there. These guys are fighting. Now, Rome is kind of lucky that they suffered this Pyrrhic victory. because they lost a bunch of their troops. But what that meant is when the dictator took his army to go out and fight, he was forced to use veterans. Typically, once you do your service, it has to be a really tough situation in which you're forced to go back and fight. And so it's veterans that are largely forced to go back and fight. And so he gets a better army than he would have otherwise had. And so these guys, with the superior defensive ground, and being more veteran troops than who they're fighting, are actually having a great time of the battle. Because it's so crampacked here, the cavalry is largely on both sides. Sorry, military writing, when you see a box with an X on it, that means infantry. When you see a box with just a line on it, that means cavalry. Just how it's drawn on maps. So the cavalry are kind of forced out of it. Remember, cavalry at this time are largely to protect your flanks. Well, the king, Ptolemaeus, he is an amazing, he's personally leading the cavalry here, and he is a great leader of cavalry. And he has great cavalry training. And so he is taking these guys, and he is finding ways to get them involved in helping them hold up in all these different positions. And so the other Roman cavalry are forced to kind of force their way in and fight wherever he keeps forcing his way in and fighting. And he's doing an amazing job of it. And so even though Rome is winning, these guys won't give up because of how well the king keeps coming in with the cavalry to support them wherever they're getting weak. And he's doing a phenomenal job. And the king's holding out because he thinks once these guys get in, we light the fires from behind, these guys can turn around and come fight, Rome's going to give in. So he thinks, hold out long enough and we'll be fine. The leader of the cavalry here, the master of the horse, his name is Aulus Cornelius Cossus. Cossus leading here, he's the one that has to keep finding this guy everywhere and trying to drive him back and keep the fighting going. He realizes this crazy king is going to pull this off. And so I have got to just nail him down. So he takes a few men with him and charges just at the king to nail the king down. And he's able to get the king, get close enough to the king that they're able to fight, and he actually fights the king in single combat. And he kills the king. And so he wins something called the spolia opima, I think. Spolia opima. And what that is if you defeat an enemy general or king in single combat, you take their actual armor and swords, their actual arms, and then you go and you put them in the temple of Jupiter. And it's a huge honor to get this achievement. It's only done 3 times in Roman history. The first person to do it was Romulus. It was after the rape of the Sabine women. It wasn't against the Sabines, it was some other king that came against him who wasn't happy about losing his daughters. So Romulus had done it, and those were sitting in the temple of Jupiter. This guy's going to be the second guy to do it. And it only happens one more time after him in the wars against Carthage, Punic Wars. So he beats him in single combat. Once he kills the king, what does an army do when they lose a king? They scatter. Game over. Our general's gone. There's no chance of us winning this. So with the king dead, it's a huge scatter. And they run back into the city of Fidenae. These eager guys down here were largely from the city of Volsci up here. So the fight's going on up here. These guys are just trying to get into the camp. The poor Romans trying to hold out here, who are having a hard time, they realize they're not going to be able to hold the gates much longer. They make a bold choice, and they cut their forces in half, and they send half of them out of the right gate, and they try and get them to go far enough away that you can't be seen, and then come back. So you got to sneak out so they can't see you leaving, and then come back like you weren't part of it. And come and attack, and make it look like it's because a victory was won up here, and you're coming from that direction. So we're going to hold out, you're going to do this. If they realize there's few enough of you that they can just quickly kill you, we're done for. But hopefully it works. And it worked. So these guys started routing. And it was a little bit too little too late. And so they end up, this unit that went after these guys ends up suffering the most casualties when everyone routes back to the city of Fidenae. And so they all take pretty heavy losses, but poor Volsci up here takes the heaviest losses out of the 3 cities involved in the war. And so now they go back into Fidenae. Now, it's not like they weren't expecting to one day have to hold the city of Fidenae against Rome. So Fidenae has been well supplied. It's a strong city. They're ready to hold out against a siege. There's no siege-craft warfare at this time. There's no siege weapons. So even though Rome wins a huge victory, costs them a lot of their military personnel, they run back into the city of Fidenae, and now they're pretty much safe. There's nothing Rome can really do about it. They can loot the camp that they left, get some plunder, get some wealth, that's all well and good. But then they pretty much have to just go back to Rome. End of the campaigning season.
Wait, what? So they don't set up siege and surround the city?
Nope. Fidenae has been preparing itself for inevitably being sieged. And so they are well supplied with food. And they have been bolstering the defenses there, so they're ready for whatever. So Rome wins a big battle, they lose a bunch of troops, but Fidenae is still under Etruscan control. It's the end of the campaigning season, Rome's got to go home.
Almost seems pointless to even fight.
Well, no, because remember, the majority of the casualties happen when one army tries fleeing. And so Rome hardly took any casualties because they're the ones that held out. And it's the other side that took massive casualties, in particular, Felici here. And so what's going to end up happening is Felici is going to drop out of the war because of this. Because the losses they're taking are already way outweighing any sort of benefit they would get by having more control over the trade coming over here.
That's true.
So it's a huge victory for Rome. And those guys just took a huge loss. But yes, the city is still its own independent city. Fidenae, not independent, but basically considering themselves part of Veii at this
Doesn't
point.
that mean that they don't have access to the Tiber River or the trade route via Spurius?
The Romans? So at this time, Rome is going to have a hard time on trade along this river.
Yeah, and the road.
And the road. So
And,
Fidenae,
Anio, or
yeah, the Anio River.
yeah.
So Fidenae is well supplied with food. On top of that, it's very, very difficult to stop food from getting into Fidenae because there's so many different ways it can come from. So it's a great place to try and hold out a siege.
Yeah, right. Makes sense.
So even though Rome wins this great victory, Fidenae still under Veii's control. They got the loot of the camp, so they have plenty of loot. Mamercus, he's going to get back to Rome. They're going to have a big triumph celebrating him and all the loot that he got. But he is not the one mostly being celebrated in the triumph. It turns out it's his buddy, Aelius Cossus, who everyone is really celebrating. And it's because he won this spolia opima that he's being so celebrated. This just is not done. This is an amazing accomplishment. It's the stuff of Homeric legends, this single combat victory. And so, big celebration. Even though Mamercus was a dictator who won the victory, everyone's kind of celebrating his buddy Cossus here. And it's not like he's bitter about that in any way. It's like, if you won $1 million, but your best bud there won 10 million, you're not like, I should have gotten 10 million. You're pretty happy. And since he's your master of the horse, you would have only appointed someone that you already were on good terms with.
Yeah.
So, his friends want being celebrated, and that is not something he's feeling bad about in the least. So, big celebration. Okay, but of course we still got to deal with Fidenae. So, one year we went, got a big victory against him. Well, it's kind of been 2 years. First year we went, got our Pyrrhic victory, forced him back across the Anio. Second year, appointed the dictator, he won a big victory. Third year is the year that we're skipping, is 436 BC. Well, kind of skipping. What's going on at that point? In 436 BC, Rome has two problems stopping him from doing anything. One of them is big political turmoil internally. And then the second one is diseases spreading in 436 BC. And so even though Rome could technically field an army, they don't want to take a bunch of sick soldiers and have them go fight. It wasn't a deadly disease, it was just they were going to be sick when they were out fighting. And you don't want sick troops. Better to wait a year. The political turmoil came from tribunes trying to bring charges against the master of the horse who had killed Spurius Maelius. So remember, the tribunes were still furious. This was the rich pleb who was accused of trying to set himself up to be king. The tribunes are still furious that this guy was killed. Because in their mind, he was going to be the first pleb military tribune. Because every time military tribunes get selected, it's patricians that get elected. And so they thought they had their first guy. Turns out he was killed, so they're furious about that. So they're going to try and bring charges against someone for having him killed, whoever they can get. But even the plebs, even the people as a whole, the commoners as a whole, aren't behind him on this one. They pretty much say, no, nothing's really going to happen. So they're trying to stir up a bunch of political turmoil, but it ends up pretty much going nowhere. So with political turmoil, with some disease spreading around, Rome decides, we'll put a pin in dealing with Fidenae for a year, and we'll deal with them the next year. That year, Veii and Fidenae, they still go and they raid Roman territory. So there was a reason to raid the armies and go after him, to levy the armies and go after him, and just decided against it. So Veii and Fidenae are getting some revenge here. Not Volsci anymore. They dropped out of the war. They suffered too much already. It's not worth it to them anymore. Other two raiding Roman territory. So that's what's going on in 436. Now we get to 435, the next year. And now Rome decides we've got to deal with Fidenae. It's time to put an end to this issue. And so, once again, they appoint a dictator. Quintus Servilius Priscus. He's appointed dictator. And first thing he does is he's got to push them. They're invading the Roman land. So first thing he does is he has a battle with them somewhere close to the Anio River. He lines up his troops, they have a fight, whatever. Troops don't really put much of a fight, and they just retreat back across the Anio to Fidenae. So the guys from Fidenae and Veii, they're pretty much thinking, we're not going to try another field battle against the Romans. If they're going to come out and meet us in the field, we're just going to run back to Fidenae since there's nothing they can do. And we'll just hold out in Fidenae until they leave, and then we can go raid the lands again. Because remember, Veii, all they care about is hanging on to Fidenae. They're not trying to go and conquer Rome. Rome's the one that's got to go back and conquer Fidenae. So they just need to play a defensive game. And in the meantime, whenever Rome's army isn't here, they just got to go raid Roman lands and make it annoying for Rome to be at war with them. Until Rome will finally come to peace talks and come to terms with the fact that they're just not getting Fidenae back. So that's their plan. Cause problems for Rome. Rome shows up, run back to Fidenae. It's well fortified, we got plenty of food, no chance of them getting it. So that's their plan. And so, that's the exact plan that they carry out. So, we're not on that slide, just was looking at the map. This one, right? Okay, so he's appointed dictator, he wins an indecisive victory. That was the one forcing him back across the Anio, and now he's got to go and deal with them actually in Fidenae.
Why do they keep appointing dictators instead of using consuls for the battles every year?
So, good question. I should have clarified that more. The Senate tries to avoid using dictators whenever they can. But against the dictator, there is no appeal and there's no vetoing the actions. So when there's political turmoil going on internally and the tribunes are blocking the levy, sometimes the Senate is forced to just appoint a dictator, and now there's no way around it. He could just levy the troops and go on his merry way. So that's one of the reasons dictators often come up in times of war. Second is they may not think, so someone's a consul, a particular threat comes up, they may not think that that consul is the right guy for the job. So there's some people who, consuls, or there's some Romans who become famous against certain people for certain victories. And so when that same people come up against, they say, he's already beat him before. And part of it is just a psychological thing. If you are a soldier from, if you're a Volsci soldier, and you know that some particular Roman general kicked the crap out of your army 1 year, and 3 years later you're facing that same general again, that's going to take a moral toll on you. A toll on your morale. And so, that's the other reason that they like to use the same guys to beat up the same people over and over again. So, those are the two reasons. But, yes, so, dictator appointed, we're taking the army, and now we're sieging Fidenae. So, Fidenae is now being sieged. Fidenae, I have no clue what the city looks like. All I know is that their citadel is on the north side. Now, you understand what the citadel is of the city? It's the extra fortified part. In case the city is overtaken, the city walls are overtaken, you get behind the citadel walls, which is even bigger, more powerful, more fortified walls. It's the city's fallback in case they're in trouble. For Rome, that's on the Capitoline Hill. That's what everyone keeps trying, that's what people would take when they try and take Rome from the inside, is get the citadel on the Capitoline Hill. And so it's also always on a hill, typically. So there's some hill here on this half of the city, Fidenae's citadel is on top of that hill with their city wall surrounding, and now here's the rest of the city. City gates are on this side. With me? So, when Quintus shows up, you know, all the army is basically hiding inside the city of Fidenae. What can you do? Okay, yes, just making sure it's the right one. Sorry, there's 2 sieges of Fidenae. Spoiler. Didn't think about that. Okay, so first thing he does is he surrounds the city, you know, the way that you know and love. He builds those barricades all the way around the city where you dig the dirt down and you pile it up, you got those coming in. Try and cut off any food coming into the city, but Fidenae is way too supplied with food. There's too many ways for people to smuggle food into the city should it need it. It's too set up for trade. It's just too hard to siege the city. And there's no way that he's actually going to be able to pull this off, which is what they all know. Now, what he does is over here on the front gates, he takes his army and he divides it into 4 groups. Each group is given a 6-hour shift, where your job is to just attack like crazy, make as much ruckus as you can, trying to break your way into the city. What we're going to do is we're going to take a small crew, and we're going to go clear on the opposite side over here, where none of the fighting is going on. Now this citadel, it shares an exterior wall, but that is going to be a super strong, impossible to get through wall. And a super tall wall. There's no point defending this wall. A few troops is fine. What they do is they go to the bottom of the hill, and they start digging a tunnel through the hill. And they dig a tunnel that's going to come up, out into the citadel here. So keep the bulk of the army distracted here. 24/7, everyone's on a 6-hour shift. Make as much commotion as you can. Keep all the armies focused on us over here like we're really trying to break into the city. And they're going to laugh at us, mocking us, telling us you don't have a chance, better luck tomorrow. While we got this crew digging a tunnel. Once the tunnel is finally dug, the 3/4 of the army that isn't on duty, because remember, 1/4 is always going at the gate, and the other 3/4 are supposed to be resting. The other 3/4 that are supposed to be resting, then go through that tunnel and come out in the citadel, in the capital of the city. And now you can just open the citadel gates into the city and take the city. And when the citadel's taken, everyone just panics. And so in this way, Rome is able to take back the city of Fidenae and get control again. Pretty cool way of taking back the city. Any questions on that?
How did they actually take, or did they have any equipment, or was it just?
Yeah, how long did it take?
Get a bulldozer.
Yeah.
I don't know how
Down
long
there.
this went on.
These skizzers hold that up.
But that would be quite the project.
Like, I don't know how you do that.
Spoons?
I don't know how they got away with it. First it took a while.
Yeah, they had to start at the bottom of the hill digging, trying to be somewhere that was out of view and where they wouldn't really notice and wouldn't bother checking too well.
So it's really far, likely, because the walls are so tall as well.
Yeah, you can
Yeah,
see
I can't remember the metrics on the Servian wall. I want to say it was like 25 feet tall and 10 feet thick, and they probably had some similar walls, at least for their citadel. But that was a Servian wall going around Rome, not the actual citadel walls.
Yeah.
When they build all these barricades around cities to siege them in, about how far from the walls are those?
I have no idea. It probably varies from city to city.
Why was there no siege equipment at the time?
So something like, there was kind of siege equipment. There would be siege equipment like building up ramps. So you could build up a ramp or use something like a battering ram, but
Or ladders.
battering ram would have a hard time. Ladders, you could try and use something like ladders. The problem is that you're very exposed using something like a ladder. With a ramp, that is a common one that they would try to use. But the problem is, to get the ramp, you got to kind of somehow build up the dirt or build up the wood to do it. What we're going to commonly see is the enemy, they kind of just throw fire on whatever you're building and burn it. And as you're digging up your part, then they dig it away. They find places to dig it away. And so you don't really make any progress. So whatever you try to do, they try to counter. And so the reason this was effective is because they didn't know you were doing it. Had they known you were doing it, they would have done their own countering of it, however you had to do it. Anyways, any other questions with Rome getting back control of Fidenae? I don't remember the conditions on which the troops were let go. with troops from Veii being let go and being sent back to Veii, but I'm sure that they negotiate something.
What did they do to the city? Did they push the city gone?
I don't recall what exactly they did to the city.
How can a city be
I'm
so-
sure that they killed some of the instigators, the people who were for the revolt. I'm sure that they killed the people responsible for killing the ambassadors. And I would guess that they let the Venetians leave under yoke. And Livy probably just said it, and I probably just forgot to write it.
I'm just curious how these cities end up revolting, considering, I mean, imagine there's just a ton of Romans in the city. At some point.
Right, so this city at the time is more heavily, by population, is way more heavily Etruscan than it is Latin.
Because the Latins don't want to be there most of the time.
It's just the way it goes. Populations settle where populations do, and like tends to attract like, and so.
Do they have to imprison all the Romans or kick them out, or, I mean, I don't understand how.
If there was some sort of internal revolt that happened where some Romans who were against the revolt were killed, potentially, it's just not recorded. So I don't know what internally went on inside of Fidenae in order for it to revolt. But the best we can tell, it was way heavier. It was way more heavy Etruscan than it was Latin at the time.
Also, that likely that the city was not treated very, like, was somewhat abused and mistreated, like, kind of like how they mistreat their allies.
No, I didn't.
Because, I don't know, it just seems so weird, after 100 years or so, for them to be so easily overthrown. I don't know.
Yep, not sure the internal politics of Fidenae that led to it happening. Okay, so now Fidenae is going back into Roman hands. All the Etruscans are a bit concerned by what just barely happened. All 12 Etruscan city-states. They watched what should have been a pretty easy win for Veii there turn into Rome actually pulling off a victory. And they're concerned that what just happened to Fidenae, with how well fortified and how well stockpiled it was with food and stuff, that maybe Veii could be next. And so the Etruscans get together, all 12 city-states, to discuss what should be done about this Roman threat to the south. It's starting to get pretty serious to the point where it could threaten one of us 12 city-states, the 12 that form the league. Rome gets word that all 12 city-states are trying to figure out what to do about little old us, and while Rome can hold their own against one of them, all 12 of them would be a serious problem for Rome. So Rome's a little bit freaked out finding out that this is happening. And so when you think that some threat is imminent, what do? You appoint a dictator so that he can hurry up and do whatever needs to be done, however this threat falls out. Now, Etruria, in their big long meeting discussing it, what they decide to do is nothing. Veii kind of got themselves into this mess. They'll figure out what to do. They'll be fine. And so it turns out Rome was freaking out about nothing. And Etruria pretty much decides, we're not really going to get involved. Veii, you're going to have to sort this out yourself. So Etruscans aren't going to send aids to Veii. Well, Veii knows that they're not going to get Fidenae. No point continuing the conflict with Rome anymore. So they agree to a treaty with Rome. And so a treaty is now signed between Rome and Veii. They now have a treaty. And that happens shortly after Rome just appointed a dictator. So Spurius Maelius, here he is a dictator. He's not really needed to deal with a military conflict anymore. That was taken care of. So he's going to find something else to do. Solve some other problem. And something that's been bugging him for a while is these censors. The censorship was just created a few years ago. He doesn't like how much power they've been given. And to his mind, they've been abusing the power. So he's going to use his dictatorial powers to force some legislation through to reduce their term limit from 5 years to 18 months. He's telling them 18 months should be plenty of time to get done with the job that we're giving them to do. Thanks, Siri. You're so useful.
Maybe the third or fourth time.
A lot of things sound like, hey, Siri. But not
Except for
that. Anyways, he thinks that the censorship just way too powerful of a position, so as dictator, forces legislation through in a single day, reducing it from 5 years to 18 months. And then, once he does that, he resigns from his dictatorship. Now, at first, all the patricians are kind of furious at him, saying, you way overplayed your hand, and taking it upon yourself to decide that they had too much power and that they were in some sense going to abuse their power. So all the patricians are kind of mad at him. The plebs kind of agreed with him, so he's being praised by the plebs. That was a good thing to do. Patricians furious at him. Remember, it's a magistrate position. Only patricians can hold. And so it's like you're limiting patrician power. What are you doing? In particular, the people who are most angry that he limited the censor's power are the censors themselves. And so what do they do to him? First thing they do is they remove him from his tribe and put him to some less prestigious tribe, because they get control where you go. On top of that, they increase his taxes 8-fold because they decide what your taxes are. And on top of that, they kick him out of the Senate because they control the Senate rules. And so they throw all their power at him that they can, abusing their power. And all the patricians are like, you know what? You were probably right. And so in the censors, responding against him and retaliating so hard, in that way they vindicate him in the eyes of everyone else that, yes, you actually did do the right thing. And so after that, Aemilius is now viewed high both in the eyes of the plebs and in the eyes of the patricians, -2. 2 of them weren't too happy with him. And he doesn't complain about his fines or anything like that. He can't remember the exact remark, but
I love when people's efforts end up backfiring on them.
some remark about his punishment will be nothing but something that brings glory to him or something like that. The more you punish me, the more honors it puts on me or something. Can't remember the verbiage. Something clever. That for sure was quoted in history and not someone made some clever later. So that's what happens with that. Now back to just political turmoil still going on. Tribune of the plebs. Every single year, we haven't really been talking about every single year, but every single year they start out the year the exact same way. They pushed for military tribunes to be elected next year rather than consuls. So every single year, that's how they all start out, trying to push patricians to agree that next year we'll have military tribunes, regardless of what it was in the current year. Because the only way that a pleb will ever get consulship type powers is if military tribunes are the ones that are elected. Then plebs can run for election, and potentially will get a pleb consul, essentially, is what they're after. And so they have to fight really hard to get patricians to let this happen. And every time they finally get it to happen, the plebs go and elect patricians. Even when plebeians can run for office. And the tribunes are at their wits' end, trying to come up with ways to get plebs actually elected for office. All the things that they have to try and come up with to do. And they come up with all sorts of laws that they keep pushing through that they think will ultimately lead to a pleb getting elected as a military tribune. It's like what the majority of their effort is being dumped into, and it just keeps not happening. To give you a sense of how desperate they were getting, one of the laws that they ended up passing is that it is illegal to whiten your toga when you are running as a candidate to be elected. To like bleach it, to be too nice, to stand out too much. You can't even do that. Because the patricians are doing it better than the plebs, and we gotta find every tactic these guys are using and make it illegal, so you plebs will finally pick a pleb to be military tribune. They cannot get it to happen, and it is infuriating them. Becoming angry and angrier with the plebs themselves. Back to war. Focus less internally, focus externally for a bit. Trying to remember the details of this one. So we got the Volsci and the Aequi attacking. They started out by attacking, probably should have put this in the other order. They started out by plundering Hernici land and then went to Latin land. Try and help keep this clear in your head for a second. Aequians, that's also why I'm calling them the Aequi. Aequians, Aequi, same thing. And the Volsci, or the Volscians, are the enemies of Rome. The Hernicians and the Latins are allies of Rome. So Rome is responsible for defending these guys against these guys. So Aequians and Volscis, they come raiding through Hernici territory, plundering as they go, having a nice little military season. May as well gather up some plunder while you're waiting for your crops to grow. And they work their way into Latin land, and I think it's close to Tusculum. where Roman consuls finally go out, fight a battle against them, and end up losing a battle where they don't really lose many soldiers, but they lost the battle, lost their camp, have to go back to Rome. So some indecisive victory. Some indecisive loss. An indecisive victory for the bad guys, because we're rooting for Rome.
That's right.
Okay. So they have a successful little military campaigning season. They go, they gather up some Pernici and Latin goods, and at the end of the military season, campaign season, they go back their merry ways, a bit richer for their troubles. Next year, if it worked 1 year, it's got to work the next year, right? Next year, let's repeat Plan A. Let's go invading through the territory, do the exact same thing. And so, Rome, doing what they do when they're in trouble again, they don't want to have another loss against these guys. They appoint another dictator. First thing the dictator does is he has all civil business suspended. So we're going to mobilize everyone towards the military. Meaning when we have civil business suspended, everyone is now focused on military duty. Building like the pikes that you need to, that you're going to use to build your ramparts around if you have to do any encircling, or for your camp or whatever. And he's going to have all the men levied. Every single man who can hold arms in the state is going to come, and they're going to join the army, and we're going to get a massive army together. One of the problems that they had in this loss up here is they were just too outnumbered, fighting both the Volsci and the Aequi. Remember, these guys weren't really fighting when Rome was dealing with Fidenae and Veii, and they lost. Well, they had their Pyrrhic victory when they were fighting there, and so they had taken a significant loss to their numbers. So, if they're going to be able to match them on the battlefield, they pretty much got to levy every single person. The only way that the tribunes are going to allow us to levy every single person is if they can't say no. And so we're going to need a dictator to do all the levying here. So, the dictator, along with the two consuls, they decide that they're going to have the dictator lead one army and a consul lead another army. They're going to go out with one consul staying behind at home to look after the city. So they didn't do away with consuls. Consuls are still consuls. Okay. Now, they're fighting in some mountain pass close to Tusculum. The reason that these armies keep working their way up to Tusculum is because it's a nice hilly terrain where it's easy for them to defend and then reach out and get plunder and come back to a defensive position at their camp. So that's why it keeps happening next to Tusculum and why Tusculum hates these guys so bad. Keep doing it right next to their city. But so now they're... Wait, is this the mountain pass one? No, this isn't the mountain pass one. Just out in the field somewhere. So I don't know if this is close to Tusculum. Sorry, think of a different battle. Out in the field somewhere, not sure where it is. But you have the Aequians camp. I'll draw them right here. You have the Aequian camp, A for the Aequians, and you have the, actually, Aequians are going to be over here. Aequians are over here, Volsci are over here. This is what it's going to be like. Down here, since Rome split into two armies, they're going to have two different camps. So Rome went out, they saw that there was an Aequian camp and a Volsci camp. The dictator said to the consul, we're going to split the army and we're going to match them camp for camp. So the consul, I want you to go and camp on the opposite side of the Aequians, and the dictator, he's going to camp here on the opposite side of the Volsci, ready to match them up whatever we're going to do. And so they go, they meet out in the field, they camp for the night, and now it's nighttime. During the night, the Aequians decide that they are going to raid one of the camps. They think they have enough troops to overtake just one of the camps when they see that the Roman army split themselves. And so that's exactly what they do. In the night, they line up their troops, and they get their army out here, and they take their army, and they actually attack the camp. And so the consul, he has to wake up to trying to defend his camp here, and get his troops out some other way, line them up, and now, once we get our troops lined up, now we can fight army against army the way we know and love. The dictator, when the consul sees this is happening, obviously the first thing he does is send word to the dictator that, hey, they're attacking our camp with a night raid. Now, it was just the Aequians. The Volsci, for whatever reason, aren't involved in this. The Volsci enjoying their night. They're probably on guard, expecting some sort of counterattack. I don't know. What the dictator does is he gets his army, and he splits it into three pieces. He has one-third of his army just charge at these guys as fast as he can, and help relieve the attack on the camp. So he has some of his armies attacking them from this side. He told another group of his army to make sure you get all the way back behind them before you attack. And so another group of his army is attacking like that. So encircling the Aequians. And then finally, a small portion of his army, the smallest portion, he sent to try and take the Aequian camp. And so they in the night are able to deal with whatever local guys are defending the Aequian camp, and Rome is actually able to take this camp, have a few soldiers in there. And he told the cavalry, your job is to be ready to go, but don't attack until it's daylight. Because we don't want to get bogged down into anything with the cavalry so that we can't respond to something when daylight comes and we can actually see what's going on. Because nobody has any clue what's going on anywhere. Right? There's no way to report back very well what exactly is going on. You're fighting in the dark. So he told the cavalry, you stay out of it until it's daylight, and then respond as you see fit. I think he was personally leading the camp that went and took the camp up here. But could be wrong on that. Anyways, when the Volsci wake up and it's daylight, what do they see? They see their allies pretty much in circles fighting for their lives. And so now they take their army, and they're going to charge at them and kind of encircle the encirclers. And so it's going to be the Romans that are the ones suffering a huge loss. And so as they're going to do that, the cavalry kind of harass them along the way, stopping them from getting there too quickly and slowing them down. And so the Roman armies here are able to respond. The Aequians barely avoid disaster. They were completely encircled. And so what it ends up being is Romans just basically pushing them all the way back to the Volsci camp. Both the Aequians and the Volsci back into their camp. And even then, they had enough momentum to keep pushing them, and they end up even driving them out of their own camp all the way out the field. So Rome ends up getting both the camps, and so they end up with that camp as well. So the Aequians suffered massive losses because there was a good amount of time there that they were completely encircled. The Volsci saved them from being completely destroyed and did enough to help them retreat out of the field without taking too many losses. So Volsci didn't take much losses. Aequians took pretty heavy losses. But on top of that, both the camps were taken. And those camps had good plunder. Those guys have been plundering for a while. So good amount of loot now coming back into Rome. I think we covered all that. So the Romans, they returned whatever the loot belonged to the Latins and the Hernici, and then took the rest, the arms of the armies, whatever they had in their local camps. Remember, you're a soldier, you're going to bring your belongings with you. You basically get the soldiers' belongings. And so in that way, they enrich themselves, and it turns out, nice little campaign season for Rome. Good attack against the Volsci and the Aequi, with the Aequi in particular taking heavy losses. Good? And now, back to war with Veii. War with Veii is the main person that we're fighting throughout this next chunk of history. So remember, it was the Aequians who took massive losses. They are ready for a treaty with Rome. So they signed an 8-year peace treaty with Rome. They're happy to leave them alone for a while. The Volsci, they didn't take very heavy losses. They kind of just relieved the attack, stopped the Aequi from being completely destroyed, and kind of did a controlled retreat after that. So they're okay, kind of, to keep the war going. Kind of not. Internally, the Volsci have two factions arguing one war, one peace. So Rome doesn't come up with a treaty with the Volsci. There's no treaty signed with them. But Volsci's own internal turmoil has got him so tied up that it turns out they're not going to be a threat to Rome for a while. Just because they're going to be arguing amongst themselves, should we go to war this year or should we stay peace? And they're going to end up sticking with peace for a while.
Wouldn't they just have a king who decides that?
No. So I don't know the structure of all these. The Aequi, the Volsci, the Sabines, and whoever else. But it's likely the case that most of them are just organized tribes of people, each with their own little officials. Think like early Rome when it was tribes without the king. Remember how each tribe had its own military tribune? Nothing to do with the military tribunes we now have. And so each tribe is going to have their own local general. That's for sure the way it was amongst the Volsci, not as sure about the Aequi. And so it's just powerful cities, each with their own armies that they've got, their own tribes, and they come out with their own leaders organized under one guy who they appoint for the sake of being the general, but then go on their merry way after that.
Considering they both they lost against the Romans with both the Aequi and the Volsci, and now the Aequi are not going to fight for 8 years if they keep their word, then I imagine the Volsci just doesn't feel like they have a chance.
Kind of. Remember, Rome had to pretty much levy everyone. Rome came with every able-bodied man they had to put up this fight. So for a standard standing Roman army and a standard standing Volscian army, I don't know how they compare, but probably pretty comparable.
And oftentimes they're outnumbered and they still win. So, there's something about the Roman soldier.
Well, the only reason it's Rome is because they kept on winning. If they would have lost like the Aequians or the Volsci or the Sabines or the Hernici or whoever else, we wouldn't know their names. It's only because they kept on winning. Okay. Huh? Okay. So, Rome's going to get a chance to kind of just breathe here. And dealt with the enemies. We dealt with Veii, we dealt with the Volsci, we dealt with the Aequi. Sabines, they were dealt with quite a while ago. They haven't really caused us any trouble in a while. So Rome's going to have a nice deserved little break from external conflict for a second. And they're going to get a break internally too from conflict as well. Here's our new plan. What we're going to do to stop the agrarian law from coming up is we're going to find out whatever law the tribunes are trying to suggest, and we're just going to push through with it like it was our own idea. So the tribunes are going to know what the plebs want. We're going to hear what the tribunes are saying. We're going to steal the legislation and push it forward as our own. And that way, make the plebs love us. And then we can let the agrarian law go, and we can have internal stability as well. So an example of that is Cossus steals some legislation from the tribunes, pushing forward some really popular financial reforms. And what the financial reforms are is rather than having to use livestock, every time you have to pay some fee to the state, pay some fine, pay some fee, pay your taxes, they're instead going to be able to use not coins, but precious metals, like bronze. They're not actually minting coins. I shouldn't have used that word. Rome's not going to be minting coins for like 100 years. Coinage makes the coin worth more than the metal it's actually printed on. And that's not what's happening here. It's the actual precious metals. And you can actually, instead of giving me 10,000 asses, however you pull that off, you can instead give me 1,000 pounds of bronze or whatever the equivalent would be. So making so that we can start doing these transactions with the state in terms of precious metals rather than actually having to gather up the livestock. And one of the reasons that this is so popular with the plebs is because it also helps deal with some corruption. Because imagine that I've got to pay you, 500 asses, and you're some guy representing the state. I don't actually have that amongst me. I have some horses maybe. I have a nice wagon or something. And so I got to pay you in terms of what I have. And so you can kind of decide on the fly that, well, that horse is worth, 50, 100 asses. And so they can kind of abuse their powers and make you kind of undervalue what you have to pay with and overvalue what someone else pays with. And so if it's in terms of some material that everyone can get their hands on, like a precious metal, then it's going to do away with a bunch of that sort of corruption. So that's one of the reasons it's just so loved amongst the plebs, is it's going to help deal with that issue. And then also just logistics of it. So there's an example of what the consuls are pulling off to help keep the plebs happy. And so this is working great. So Rome experiences a few years of relative peace, both internally and externally. Nothing worth mentioning for a few years.
Is this like the first time they've not been at war in those many years? Or?
They're still at war.
Oh.
They're still at war with the Volsci. In other words, the gates of Janus are still open.
That's what I was wondering. When are they going to close those gates?
After the Second Punic War, and then not again until after the Principate of Augustus.
Wow.
So the doors were closed 3 times, because they've already been closed once, right? Closed once with Numa, the second king. Going to be closed after the Punic Wars, which is only like 500 years later. And then closed a couple hundred years after that. So Rome's still technically at war. Okay, but things are pretty nice at Rome. Now Veii, back to Veii. Veii, they haven't been doing nothing this whole time. What's been happening with Veii is initially it was kind of just private citizens from Veii who are angry at Romans. It'd be like some guy from Veii takes the time one night to sneak onto your farm and steal one of your sheep and run off with it. Small incursions like that started out, and they started getting more and more emboldened to the point where it was something that could arguably be called an army coming and actually sacking Roman lands. Veii would see it otherwise, but that's how Rome's seeing it. And so Rome is definitely seeing this as Veii violating their treaty. They have a treaty with Rome right now. This is not allowed. Even if it's technically not the state of Veii doing it, it's their responsibility to stop their people from coming on Roman lands. And so Rome would like to do something about this. So Veii is making small incursions. And on top of that, there's rumors that Fidenae is preparing for a revolt again. Now, Rome, they're not just standing by doing nothing as people are coming in trying to take their stuff. There's some guys that go out there and try to deal with them. And they actually find that a few people from Fidenae were participating in what was going on from Veii. And since the people from Fidenae are participating on it, they come under Roman jurisdiction. Rome just has them killed for participating. So youth in Fidenae are behaving a lot like youth from Veii, which is a bit disturbing. And they could very much revolt again. And so Rome decides the best thing to do is to get more Romans in Fidenae. The real problem is Fidenae is just way too heavily Etruscan. And so we need to send a bunch of colonists into Fidenae. And since Fidenae had just taken a bunch of losses, like a bunch of their soldiers were killed, those were a bunch of people in Fidenae, Rome is kind of in charge of what to do with their property. And so Rome decides, we're going to send a bunch of settlers into Fidenae, and we're just going to give them the property, the land of the soldiers that had died at Fidenae. And so that will be their way of supporting their living, increase their population. Now you can kind of think about how this happens in practice. Your neighbor used to be Bob, good friend of yours. Bob got killed, and now a Roman's running his farm.
What about the children and the family they left behind? They're also on the farm because they're...
Yeah, however the logistics fall out with all the poor kids is how it comes out. So anyways, settlers are coming into Fidenae. Fidenae probably not too happy about those settlers. Now, as far as these excursions that Veii is making, these incursions into Roman territory, the only reason Rome didn't really go and gather some troops and deal with them is there was also a drought and a pestilence at the time for that year. And so they were already kind of dealing with the food shortage. It wasn't a huge deal, but something occupying their time. And they also had to deal with the fact that a good chunk of the men who would go off fighting would be sick. They don't want to go levy the troops and go fight off the Venetians for what is kind of a small incursion. Yeah, we're losing property, but we could put it off for a year and deal with them next year. The next year, because the consuls and the Senate very much wants to levy the troops, the tribunes blocked the levy, saying that the only way that we will allow the troops to be levied is if this year we don't have consuls, we have military tribunes. And the Senate decides that we can't put off levying the troops, and so fine. We're going to go ahead and give you what you want this year. We're going to have military tribunes rather than consuls. And remember, with military tribunes, it's up to 6 can be elected, but what gets elected gets elected. They don't have some predetermined number. You just have to reach some certain qualification to have technically been elected. And so that year, 4 military tribunes get elected. So we have 4 military tribunes, but we only have one enemy, Veii. And only 1 military tribune needs to stay back to protect the city. The other 3 military tribunes, whoever they end up being, are going to want to go on the war. They're going to want to be the ones to go and fight. And each of them is out to get glory for themselves. They want to be the one who wins the big victory. So you've got an army now that has 3 heads. And so...
Don't break it up into 3 armies?
Nope. What they're going to end up doing, they don't decide it here, but they decide next time they have too many military tribunes, is to alternate days on who's in power. But so these military tribunes are arguing amongst themselves about what their tactics should be as they're getting their army ready to go fight Veii. And they take their army, they take it into Veii's land, they take their army, line it up, they're getting ready to build their camp. But Veii, when they see their army lined up, they hurry up and line up their army, and they just charge at the Romans. not even giving them time to build their camp first. And so they're so taken aback, they have 3 heads who they haven't really settled how they're going to handle the fact that there's 3 of us who are in charge. And so all 3 of them start yelling different orders. Some of them are telling them to stand their ground. Some of them are telling them to retreat, telling them to do whatever they're telling them to do. And it just creates complete chaos. So the fact that Veii attacked them so quickly, didn't give them a chance to really organize how they were going to handle the fact that they had 3 heads, made this a complete disaster for Rome. And so, Rome, once again, suffers a defeat. And the Romans, really quick, retreat back to Rome. So Veii got a quick victory there. I'm not sure how bad the losses were in terms of casualties, but the way it comes across is it was a very quick battle where they couldn't really decide what to do. Some probably tried to stand and fight for a while and ended up fleeing the battlefield. But definitely a humiliating defeat for the Romans, if not one that actually had a lot of casualties. And so this is a huge PR victory for Veii. They start broadcasting and sending people to all the other cities in Etruria. We didn't just beat 1 Roman general. We took on 3 of those guys at the same time and sent them running like that. And so that's what they're advertising to the rest of the Etruscans. And so they say, if you will help give us some support, we will be able to take on the Romans. So they're trying to talk other Etruscan cities into sending people. Now, they're not really trying to get another Etruscan city to declare war on Rome. They're trying to get people in those cities to basically come as mercenaries, win some great loot with us. We're such great generals against these Romans, they don't know how to handle us. So that's the PR that they're sending around, and it's somewhat effective, so troops are coming to Veii, getting ready to renew this war effort against Rome. On top of that, Veii, they don't really want Rome, they want Fidenae back. And so they got to talk Fidenae into revolting as well. When they win this victory against the Romans, they've been trying to get Fidenae to rebel against Rome. Fidenae's been saying, no, we've had enough of that. When they get this victory against Rome, and get such an easy victory against them, then Fidenae decides that they can get behind them. And so they end up killing all the settlers who just got sent to Fidenae, and they go back into revolting. So all the Romans that just got sent to the city, just killed by Fidenae. And now Fidenae doesn't have a choice, they've got to win. Otherwise they're in big trouble. And since Fidenae is, in terms of the map, the one's closest to Rome, gotta go all the way back to here. Since Fidenae is the city closest to Rome, everyone's coming to Fidenae, and then that's going to be where they have their military, where they strike out from militarily. So that's the city that they're all fortifying in. Somewhere around here. Okay, so now Fidenae, well fortified, Veii supporting the city, and random mercenaries from all throughout Etruria are now supporting the city. Going to be a very tough city to take. And so the following year, Rome, once again, appoints a dictator. And they appoint again Marcus Aemilius. He was the one, not who won the first siege, but who won the first battle of Fidenae. That decisive victory, but he couldn't take the city because it was too fortified. So, same dictator once again, and he's going to pick his same master of the horse. The one who won the spolia opima. Very famous guy. Again, these are just going to be huge morale hits to your enemy. Remember what I did to you last time, type talk. So, yeah, reminding you who they are there. Okay, so Mamercus, this time the Etruscans, they're just going to try holding on to Fidenae. They're not going to go down into Roman lands. And so the fight's going to happen close to Fidenae. We're going to have Fidenae city up here, wherever it is. We got the Tiber River over here, wherever it is. We've got the mountains, the mountain range that there is over here, wherever it is. And Mamercus, he's got his army stationed down here. And they're also going to have the camp for all the Etruscans somewhere over there. And this time, Fidenae, they're going to meet them in the field. They're not just going to let Rome go and surround them and come up with some clever way to siege them. They're going to try actually beating them in the field this time. And so they line up their armies. However they line up their armies are spread out wide enough that, once again, cavalry aren't really going to be involved in the fighting. Remember, cavalry are largely just to protect your flanks. And so since your army pretty much goes from wherever these mountains are to wherever your flank is, then we're going to be okay there. Don't need the cavalry to guard your flanks. So Rome has their cavalry back here, and I think they chose to not even mount their cavalry and just use them as infantry to help fight. Now, what Mamercus, our dictator, did is prior to the battle, he had some troops sneak up into the mountains, up here closer to Fidenae, just a fair-sized group of them, but had some troops sneak up into the mountains. And he told the cavalry, don't get involved in the fighting, don't dismount and come help in the fighting, hold your ground until I tell you to do otherwise. And with that, he decides to just engage the Etruscans. Okay, so yeah, they just engage, they start fighting with each other. The fight's going however the fight's going. I think early on, the Romans are actually kind of winning. And then Fidenae does something crazy. Out of the actual city, so it wasn't anywhere in the Roman view, they have a bunch of people come charging out of the city, and it's on this side that Rome starts getting the upper hand. This wing starts winning. And so all these troops rushing out of Fidenae, they end up deciding that this is the side that they need to come and support. And what these guys are coming with, these are largely just Fidenae citizens. These aren't even really the soldiery. All they're armed with, basically, are torches and some sort of projectile that they can light on fire and throw. Now, fighting with fire is not particularly effective. It's not a particularly good tactic to use in these battles. But this is the first time it's really been used that the Romans have ever seen. And fire is extremely intimidating. And so they end up coming with a bunch of fire and fire-type equipment, and they run into the lines, and they're just throwing fire into wherever the Romans are. More than that, they're creating just a bunch of smoke on the battlefield from all the different fires that they have lit in, whatever the flammable stuff is that they're burning. And as they're throwing their projectiles that are on fire into the Roman side, that's just creating more smoke. And it's kind of breaking out into this kind of chaos on this side. And the Romans are starting to freak out a little bit. So the cavalry decide we have to help with whatever is going on here. The problem that they have is they're cavalry, and you can't really see what's going on here. They don't think they'd be able to steer their horses very well in all this chaos. And so what they end up deciding to do is to take, not the stirrups, the bridles off of the horses, so that they're not steering the horses, and the horses kind of know that they're going to decide where they go. They're going to trust the horse to be able to steer itself better than they can steer it. And with that, they kind of just charge their cavalry in. And when they get to where the enemy is, they just start attacking whoever they could see. And this turns out to be really effective. The horses are able to kind of figure it out on their own, and so they're not steering them, and they're able to just focus when they see an enemy, try and stab them. And so they're running down a bunch of the people who were just armed with torches. They don't really have anything to fight these cavalry with. And so this turns out to be crazy effective. Now, it is just complete chaos as to what's going on here from these guys' perspective. There's tons of smoke, and now with the cavalry charging in, kicking up dust, it's dust and smoke, and no one can really see what's going on here. The cavalry know that they're doing okay, but they're the only ones who really know they're doing okay. It's chaos. Nobody really knows what's going on this side of the battlefield. Eventually, the people actually involved, seeing people dying next to him, they know what's going on in the battlefield, and they decide it's time to leave the battlefield. A bunch of them are Tuscans. They're not even going to bother trying to make it back to their camp. They know that if I can get to the other side of the Tiber, I'll be okay. So they start freaking out. They're going to jump into the Tiber, start swimming across, and get away from the battle as fast as they can. When it's clear that these guys are starting to flee the battlefield, it takes a while to figure it out, these guys start to panic. And that's when the dictator sends word to these guys to come out of hiding and start attacking from behind. So these guys are coming down off the mountain to attack him from behind. These guys are fleeing the field. These guys decide it's time for us to go as well. Now the Etruscans from their army, they're going to follow these Etruscans and try and just cross a river. But the people who are from Fidenae, from both sides, are going to try and rush back to the actual city of Fidenae. And so they're going to try and rush back to their actual city. Now, the cavalry can't really charge them down because the horses don't have their bridles, and so the cavalry can't charge them down the way they normally do. Once the cavalry charges through, they're kind of, I don't know how they're going to figure out their horses, do whatever they're going to do. But they're not ready to just pursue them the way that you'd want to pursue them. These guys are largely dropping their arms and running, and so the Romans, these guys aren't going to be able to keep up with them unless they also drop their arms, which isn't a very smart thing to do. And so they can't really chase them down the way that they want to. Fortunately, these guys coming down the mountain are nice and fresh. And so when they see these guys all fleeing towards Fidenae, they, with their arms, follow them. And they're able to make it into the city with a bunch of Fidenae running back into the city. And when they get into the city, their whole job now is to hold the gates open. And they defend the gates. And since these guys largely have to drop their arms to run back to the city fast enough, they were kind of hoping that they could close the gates before the Romans got there. They're able to fairly easily hold the gates open until the bulk of these guys are gone. Chaos clears up. Guys get their horses back however they got. Everything's back under control. Get control of the enemy camp. And we march our armies into Rome. To a completely now defenseless enemy because they dropped their arms. And now Rome has no mercy for them. So they go in there, every single soldier killed, no question about it. Second, they allow all the officers of their armies and anyone who did a particularly brave or valorous action in the battlefield, each of them get to go and pick 1 or 2 slaves from the population that they want as slaves. The rest of the people in Fidenae all sold into slavery. All that money goes into the Roman treasury. Every single resident of Fidenae, gone. Rome will then populate it with their own colonists, and Fidenae is going to drop out of the history books now, because now they're just going to function as a good little Roman colony. And that will be the end of Fidenae. You won't hear us talk about it again. So, they picked a bad time to revolt.
Should've killed all the
We talked about, Rome will be forgiving the first time. The second time, they come back with a vengeance. And we'll see that happen a lot.
Well, they killed 4 last time. Now, how many do you think they killed this time? 1,000? 100?
Population of Fidenae, I don't know. If I had to spitball an answer, I would guess at that time it was sitting around 30,000.
So how many settlers do you think that? That's a lot today. I think
Yeah,
killed
that's a lot.
How many settlers did these guys kill?
Roman settlers they killed when they revolted.
Yeah.
Did it give a number? It would have been probably a couple thousand.
Wow.
But typically when you pick settlers, it's going to be grown men who you send to go be settlers. So it would have been a strong people typically are sent to go be the settlers for whatever the area is. But yeah, so I have no clue. That's just me guessing off the top of my head what their population would have been, but would have been substantial for sure.
Do you know the population of Rome during that time?
Rome, last census we took was around 117, I want to say. I don't know if any of you remember. Probably not worth finding in a slide, but I would guess that at this time they're approaching the 150,000 mark. Well, they had just suffered some pretty bad losses, so maybe it's a bit lower, but I would guess their peak up to this point is around the 150,000 mark. And actually, yeah, that sounds about right, because when, did you get a number?
It says 150,000,
That's
fluctuating between 150 and 400,000.
426 BC.
So I think that is fluctuating quite a bit from the war and blah, blah, blah.
Well, it will get a lot more as we go forward here, as more populations are integrated. But yeah, 150 sounds about right, because what that's going to be giving is, the reason I went from 170 to 150 is we got to include foreigners and slaves. Because the Romans don't include that in their census.
Oh, yeah.
So their census is citizens and families of citizens, and that's what they count in their census. When Rome reports its own population. So that's why I guess 150 from 117. And that's where I got that spitball number. Okay. We talked about that, and then Spurius Maelius, being the stud that he is, after his 16 days that it took to deal with Fidenae, he gives up the dictatorship, following the example of the great Cincinnatus. Okay, that ends our battle with Fidenae. Sorry about that, went a little bit over. So we'll pick up with the peace that Rome gets to enjoy next time, having dealt so graciously with her enemies. Any questions you want recorded before we call it a night? Okay, keep an eye on the Facebook page. There's probably like a 40% chance I'll have enough